This presentation looks at a second aspect of Montessori's theory of human development, which is the fundamental human needs. The concept of human needs is usually addressed in relation to human tendencies, and we talk about the human needs and tendencies. A need is a psychological or physiological requirement for the well-being of an organism. So plants have needs, animals have needs, and humans, whoever they are, have needs. All humans have the same basic needs. We have different ways of meeting our needs, and it is these differences that result in differences between individuals and between people over time and geographical location. Montessori regarded the accumulation of knowledge as a result of the methods we use to meet our needs, and this constitutes culture in both senses of the word. I want to explain what I mean there by culture in both senses. Culture is often understood to be the expression of a group of people or a nation, so the Xhosa culture or English culture. It's also taken to mean things like art and cultural aspects that are somehow artistic and creative. But there's another use of this word in Montessori's writings, and I'm not sure what the original Italian word was, but it is translated to mean subjects, school subjects, history, geography, biology. So sometimes Maria Montessori uses the word culture. So accumulated knowledge emerges as school disciplines as well as the way it emerges as something related to the way that people conduct their lives. So we need to just be aware of this dual aspect of that word when we encounter it. So in Montessori education, you might encounter this chart. It's one of the many, many charts that we use when teaching history, actually. It's at the core of the history curriculum. This particular chart I'm accrediting to AMI Digital. I downloaded it from there some time ago. It is no longer available on that site, but I do believe that AMI is planning to make them available at some point. So Montessori saw spiritual, human needs divided into two areas, spiritual and material. And this is a fundamental needs chart that is used in Montessori, and it's used as a key organizing principle actually for the study of humans and therefore history within the cosmic curriculum for 6 to 12-year-old children. And that's really as far as most discussions around needs in Montessori training goes from my experience. I want to suggest that we actually need to look at needs a little deeper to really understand this. And there's no real Montessori source that goes into this deeper exploration of human needs, other than the extent to which it unfolds in the history curriculum. And Montessori refers to psychohistory. I'm not going to be able to go into that in too much detail in this course, but I will definitely elaborate on the idea of psychohistory as a psychodiscipline in a video that will be released in this week, later on in the week. Now, what is a need? We need to look at that in the context of something that helps the organism survive, that sustains an organism, and we explore needs in the curriculum actually with the children in terms of needs of plants, needs of animals. So the idea of a need, and then obviously needs of humans again across time and also in different cultures, it's a key component of the curriculum, but it's a key idea that also informs the curriculum and helps us understand the developing human. Development is obviously related to the word developing, which means to cause or evolve or unfold gradually, to lead or conduct something through a succession of states or changes, each of which is preparatory for the next. So this developing, this word development or developing, will become very important in the next lecture that I'm going to give you. But in this course, we've got to look at the difference or the tension between the development of the individual personality, which is biologically driven, and then the way that that developing personality, developing organism adapts to a time and place. And this tension exists between these two forces. So in order to meet needs, humans adapt to the environment, and at the same time, we adapt the environment to meet our needs. We spoke about that in the last presentation. This is the basis of human development. So we've looked at some needs on that chart, these materials and spiritual needs, our material needs for shelter, for clothing, for defense, for transport, and so on. But is that all we really need to know about needs? So I'm going to ask a rhetorical question at this point. But again, as we go along, I'll say, how do human needs relate to that? So I'm going to pose the question, how does a knowledge of human needs affect our day-to-day practice? And what I'd like you to do at this juncture is to get yourself a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and on that piece of paper to write down your answer to this question. So you can pause the video, make some notes about your thoughts on this, and then continue, and then come back to your list as how you think the knowledge of human needs might affect practice. And there are some thoughts that I've jotted down for myself that we can discuss on the forum, if you like, or on our call, if you want. And we can look at those and come back to them. So some of the issues around this question of human needs affecting our practice might relate to the following issues. And I'm just throwing them out here without any ideas of my own attached to them. The one is the whole question of decolonizing curriculum. If this isn't a term you're familiar with or comfortable with exploring, that's quite okay at this point. But could there be a relationship between the way we look at human needs and the idea of decolonizing curriculum, changing the way we look at curriculum in relation to needs? How does the idea of human needs and a knowledge of human needs affect integration or inclusion of people with different abilities, neurotypical and neuroatypical and physical atypical people? Is there something that this could help us with? And then the last thing, how do we look at behaviors and interactions? If we see children just as a set of behaviors, or if we see behaviors as a signal, maybe, about needs and how people interact, could that have some sort of relationship here with the idea of human needs affecting practice? So I'd like you to think about that. So I'm going a little bit off the path that Montessori took us on, with human needs as something relating to tendencies, to saying do needs maybe affect practice as well, and this understanding. of needs being something that is intricately involved with tendencies that we really can't control, that we're driven by. Our tendencies give us ways of meeting our needs, remember, and that results in acquisitions. So how might that inform some of these very difficult issues around practice? So the next slide I've got here is Maslow, and this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I'm going to throw some very different ideas about human needs at you. None of these align completely with anything Montessori wrote, but it might help us to think about how we see needs. So you can find lots of information online about, Maslow's hierarchy. What we mean by hierarchy is that needs are addressed in a certain order. So certain needs are more pressing than other needs. And he starts off with physiological needs: food, water, sleep, breathing, and health. And if those aren't taken care of, then we're not really able to deal with the next layer on the hierarchy: security of body, employment, resources, morality, family, property, and health. So he seems to think that the lower levels help us achieve the higher levels. A man by the name of Manfred Max Neef came with a very different approach. Manfred Max Neef had a concept called human scale development, and when you finish this course and you have some spare time, because Montessori teachers really have so much spare time, he's really worth looking into a little bit. He had an idea called human scale development. And he worked mostly in South America, and he discovered that sometimes meeting the needs that are higher up on Maslow's hierarchy actually gave people the stamina, the power, the impetus, the support they needed to meet the lower scale needs. So he basically said there isn't really a hierarchy of needs at all. And subsistence is really just one of a number of needs with equal drive, equal necessity associated with them. And some of his needs that he talks about, so you'll find some of these on Montessori's chart, and you'll find some of them on Maslow's chart, but some of them don't appear on either. And he talks about things like freedom, identity, creation, participation, understanding, affection. So some of these needs are very emotional needs, and some of them are needs that Montessori sees as conditions that allow for development. So I'm just throwing this in here for you to think about how it might relate to tendencies and how it might also relate to some of the things that we later on will talk about providing in a Montessori environment. And so human skill development is basically about community development, okay? And it's focused and based on the satisfaction of fundamental human needs. And really, Manfred Max Neef's goal was really to develop participatory democracy. And I'd love to, at some point way down the line, have a conversation around that and the extent to which Montessori might have been considering the idea of participatory democracy as the outcome of full development of humans. But that's a long way down the line. But Manfred Max Neef was really interested in the idea of quality of life. And the way people attain quality of life rather than gross national product and the usual indicators of whether a society is working. And Manfred Max Neef also believed, along with Montessori, that fundamental human needs are the same in all cultures and all historic periods. They just didn't have the same understanding or didn't express the same understanding of exactly what those fundamental needs are. A third person who also looks very much at needs is Marshall Rosenberg, who was the originator of an idea called nonviolent communication. And I've listed here some of the needs that Marshall Rosenberg identified. And he divided them into different groupings, as you can see here. Again, some overlap with Max Neef, some overlap with Maslow, and some overlap with Montessori. But he's very, very much interested here in not so much physical, although there are some here, air, food, movement, rest for adult sexual expression, safety, shelter, touch, and water, which would coincide with Montessori's physical needs to some extent. But he also starts looking at things like connection. And we see some items like communication that Montessori's view is actually a tendency rather than a need. We tend to communicate. But we do that, we tend towards communication and gregariousness because we need communication to survive as humans. So it's often very difficult to separate a need and a tendency. I don't want us to get too bogged down in that. But I'd like to suggest that from the point of view of classroom communication, having some knowledge of Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication can be particularly helpful. And I actually have a section in vocabulary development and oral language development where I suggest that this might be one of those rare additions to our Montessori curriculum where we bring in a vocabulary of needs and feelings, which we are so bad generally at expressing, certainly expressing in a way that is constructive. So I want to raise something here very, very quickly on the question of needs. And that is that needs are often confused with solutions. We would say, I need a house. I absolutely need a house. Every human being needs a house. And that would be a confusion because not every human being really needs a brick house. In fact, not every human being might not feel comfortable in a brick house. It's an assumption. Some people may actually be quite happy with a yurt or a caravan or a hut or a tree house or maybe even a shanty. It would meet the need for shelter. But it might not meet a different need. The need for shelter can be met by a tent made out of skins. But the need for respect, security, safety, and comfort might not be met by a shack or a tent. So we need to be very clear that needs and solutions should not be confused or conflated. So a possible activity that you might want to do is just have a look at what's there and what's missing. This is not something you'd necessarily as comparison between these theories of needs. I did do this exercise with adolescents who found it quite interesting and fascinating how different people looked at needs and wants and the expression thereof. So that is the end of this very brief introduction to needs. So see human needs and tendencies together, and I invite you to explore this idea a whole lot more. And also contemplate whether this is a useful exercise or if it's a distraction. Thank you very much.